most of the time you don't know each other and you just meet briefly in some places. But I got to know Vanessa's work through her a very precious and little book, very different from the kind of book we see today, which we call contemporary books. And I looked at the book, I hold the book and I read the name, which was Sweet Nothings. And then I looked at the portraits, and I thought it's very difficult to actually find such a powerful and simple names, and to have that sort of photograph which talks so powerfully and so poetically, where you don't need any other text. We kept in touch. I wanted to show Vanessa's work for quite some time. Most of the time she was busy, but this time it worked out. So we are very glad to have her here with us. Her show is in Olias Process. Vanessa just had a big show in Barbican this year in London, where there were also work of Dorothea Lange, and it was some sort of conversation. But I leave it to Vanessa. She will present her work. Thank you so much for coming here.
First of all, just to say really thank you so much for inviting me here. And just to say that I don't speak very comfortably. I'm a bit hopeless in front of a big crowd, but and so to kind of help me, I tend to read. So please, if you can kind of bear with me. So kind of in the spirit of the fact that we're all visual people, I thought I'd start with showing you a picture of my name, and my name's Vanessa, Vanessa Winship, as you know. And, Vanessa is a name I always hated as a kid, but it actually means butterfly, and there are several butterflies who are the Vanessa butterfly. She's a painted lady, she's a red admiral. And so I kind of got to like this name. And the other picture, representation, is a little boat. It's a little ship. And I decided that my name really should be Wind Ship. And there's one thing missing, and that's the D. And of course in this picture, it's without wind. So just a kind of a little playful beginning of my name. And the work I'm actually showing you is She Dances on Jackson, but I thought that I'd just show you one picture of where I come from. And I come from a place, tiny little place called Barton-on-Humber. And as a kid, it was a place that I imagined that everybody else really knew about. But of course, it's a place where nobody knows and no one goes to. And so this is where I'm from. There's a sort of muddy river that runs between Barton-on-Humber to Hull, the big city on the other side. And this is the cover of the book that eventually became She Dances on Jackson. So I wanted to kind of read a brief statement before I speak about She Dances on Jackson, which is something I'm sort of thinking about right now. So I'll read it. It is my belief that we're all living with the legacy of empire. We are the great-great-granddaughters and sons of that legacy, one of great power, but also of great exploitation. And this is my belief that perhaps somehow we are all vessels who carry with us on some fundamental level the burden of that legacy. And what does that legacy create in the psyche of those who survive through it today? How do we get over our fears and prejudices? How do we learn to live together, to heal our collective wounds? I'm just one small voice, one single note, one drop in an ocean, but perhaps together we can find a way to transform and understand our world. Can we do this with books and paper, pictures and sometimes words? What are pictures and words but signs and symbols? Maybe magic. And this is a quote, and I don't want to kind of speak about the occult in any way, but so it's a small quote that I've found, and it's a very interesting quote about what it is that we do. There is some confusion as to what magic actually is. I think this can be cleared up if you just look at the very earliest descriptions of magic. Magic, in its earliest form, is often referred to as the art. I believe that this is completely literal. I believe that magic is art, and that art, whether it be writing, music, sculpture, or any other form, is literally magic. Art is, like magic, the science of manipulating symbols, words, or images to achieve changes in consciousness. The very language of magic seems to be talking as much about writing or art as it is about supernatural events. A grimoire, for example, a textbook of spells, is simply a fancy way of saying grammar. Indeed, to cast a spell is to simply manipulate words to change people's consciousness. And it just really appealed to me that that what we do with pictures and words sometimes is we attempt to transform, and I think that's possibly the best we can do with the pictures that we make. So to go on. So now I'm about to speak about She Danced on Jackson. The work, which became known as She Danced on Jackson, was made during 2011 and 12 and was finally published in May 2013. I was able to make this work thanks to an award from the Henri Cartier-Bresson Foundation that funds a photographer to create a body of work that wouldn't otherwise be possible. The Bresson Foundation Award was created after its namesake in 1983. In 2011, I was the first woman to receive the award, and in 2018, I still remain its only female recipient. However, the award itself is generous in every respect, and for me, a very large amount of money to create a work itself, the production of an exhibition and a book or catalogue to accompany a show. And I will always be incredibly grateful to have been afforded this opportunity. I'd originally applied for the award with a project proposal I'd entitled Out There, an American Odyssey, and the work eventually became She Danced on Jackson. So I want to say a little bit about the context of how this work began, both my own context and that of the context of the juncture in our history. I guess the most fundamental thing was receiving the news that my father was terribly sick. It was something inconceivable. He was a man who walked and cycled miles every day, and for the most part, ate as a monk. Do I go or do I not go? My father knew this gift to be an opportunity probably never to be afforded to someone like me again. And at that time, we were not sure what was ailing him. Communications in this context were often fraught and confusing. And so I made the decision to go. But before I talk more about the work, I want to speak a little bit about the unconscious. I know a tiny bit about the unconscious because my father had read Jung, and the father of my son had read Freud. And at college I was taught, amongst others, by Victor Bergin, whose teaching had introduced me again, but with more effect, the work of Freud and Lacan. And I can't totally say I understand, or today even understand, but one of the things that really stuck was about seeing on an unconscious level, and how one sees in this context, and what registers whether you like it or not. In amongst all the preparation work, speaking to people, asking about literature, a young woman who I'd met whilst teaching a small workshop sent me a link to what is probably one of the most horrible books I've ever seen, a book that some of you may also have seen, called Without Sanctuary, Lynchings in America. It registered in my close frontal cortex, not really unconscious at all. I'd framed my proposal in the search of the American dream, and my interpretation may not have been what the original premise was, but an interpretation, a metonym for perhaps all of our hopes and dreams, a better life for our children, equality and possibility being sought all over the world. So the context of the work was made from the beginning of the first round of the Republican primaries, finishing with the re-election of Barack Obama. It was the time of the short-lived Occupy Wall Street movement, known as the 99. It was during the time of an unprecedented drought, and today California remains burning. And perhaps, probably most the significant thing that happened during that time was the murder of a young African-American teenager called Trayvon Martin, and the beginning of the Black Lives Matter movement. I followed closely all of this. I listened to the public radio as we drove the thousands of miles across the vast landscape that is America. We watched endless news shows in the bedrooms of the modestly priced motels we stayed in. The motels, usually on the peripheries of town, in industrial spots, often on highways. The place is frequented by just about every working poor person you can imagine. We moved across the land, as just about everyone else in the US, by car. A car isn't a signifier of wealth, it's a necessity, and many people in the US don't have that. We went to several Occupy camps. We moved with the people in Miami, where Trayvon Martin's family came from. We listened to impassioned speeches about losing a son. We moved on endless roads with signs memorializing dead relatives. And one of our first stops had been California, where old friends of ours lived. We'd gone west, I guess where everyone attempts to have done historically, a place of sunshine and sea, and a promise of prosperity. My plan with the work had been to follow my instincts, based on my life experiences, almost half a century, to follow what other people we met might tell us about, a long chain of connections and connections. The United States is a vast, vast landmass. 52 states as 52 separate countries, all with different histories and different cultures, all of whom come to represent the United States. An impossible notion to create something that says, this is America. I can only ever say that this is my experience in America, in and of America, with all of the collective baggage that goes with that experience. The vastness of the landscape creates its own dynamic. People are almost inevitably spread out. Nowhere feels walkable, only the mad or bad, they say. So in my experience of the United States of America, is a place where people yearn for conversation, yearn to connect. And yet there are vast levels of separation, economically being one of the most marked. And we made a small presentation to a group of students there, and their teacher mentioned a place where attitudes were less than tolerant. Eventually this link took us to Laramie, where a young man called Matthew Shepard had been brutally beaten and left to die. Matthew Shepard had been gay, and they say he was involved in drugs. And of course, there's nothing left, there's nothing visible left, except for the earth he had once stood upon. Do I listen to the resonances of that place, the ground beneath my feet? There's nothing there, of course, except for what I know that has gone before. And unconsciously, as we leave the city limits of Laramie, I make a picture of an unadorned metal heart left by the side of the road for another soul. And so as the time continued, we moved from place to place, following links and connections as a means of comprehending what the society was about. I would finally like to add that when I first proposed this project to the Bresson Foundation, I wrote, there is something exquisitely beautiful and yet profoundly disturbing about America, that vast and almost inevitable loneliness created by the melancholy in the struggle undertaken in search of the American dream. And what is that American dream? The idea of freedom, equality, and possibility. A place like America, like a famous personality we all think we know, and which as a result we treat with a certain familiarity. For me, such familiarity comes from exposure to American film, literature, and popular culture, and I carried with me a spectrum of second-hand experiences and a multitude of snippets of information, sometimes facts, sometimes little fictions. And I have felt the power and reach of this fascination, and I'm drawn to discover it for myself. I'm not outside nor untouched by the power and seduction of such a concept, an idea or myth. I don't go there some kind of scientist. I'm as much part of that search as the next person, but be it from the outside looking in, or from the inside continuing to search. And so the search is twofold: discovering as an outsider and wanting to find a place within that dream. Of course, all of us know and understand that myths are just that, but we continue, often despite what we know instinctively, and I guess this is the nature of design. It really was a very particular time on a profoundly personal level. I lost my father over the course of making this work, and there's no doubt that what I've created is completely coloured by this. And so I'm perhaps even more acutely aware of the delicacy of intimacy, really not wanting to overburden each personal encounter. And with these encounters, there is a sense of vulnerability. So what I'm going to read next is the only piece of text that appears in the book. Chicago, 2012. Returning home after a day walking the streets. Chicago has a subway system, and it's a pleasure to be close to people. As I arrive on the platform, there's a crowd gathered around a band. The music they're playing is good, and no one seems to care that the trains aren't so frequent. Standing close by, I spot a small group, 2 women and 2 girls, around the same age. The 2 women are middle-aged and dressed in plain winter coats. The girls, both in woolen animal hats and coloured fleeces. I suppose I notice them because none of them looks like the other. I try to imagine who they are to one another, and then it becomes obvious as the taller of the 2 girls gestures to one of the women in a way that only a mother and daughter could do. She touches the base of the woman's neck, silently asking permission to do something. The woman indicates to the girl it's okay. It was obviously something she's used to giving permission for. And with that permission, the girl peels off her fleece and heads to the direction of where the music's coming from. She moves with the greatest of ease into the centre of the crowd, who seem to part the way for her, as if they'd been expecting her arrival. Her body moves freely, but without a glimpse of posturing or adult mimicry. This is a dance of her own making, her own spontaneity. And she seems unaware of the adults cheering her on and the band smiling by her presence. And after a while, a woman feels she needs company and joins a small solo dancer. And although the girl acknowledges her arrival and at times moves in communion with the other woman, mostly she's comfortable to dance alone. The dance lasts for several more minutes, the girl never losing breath or rhythm, the crowd's affection for this rare moment, acknowledged in their movement closer together, creating a protective circle around the scene. And finally the next train arrives, and the girl's charge pushes a crumpled wad of notes into the hands of one of the band members, and they leap onto the train. It's my train too, and I sit facing this little group, fascinated by their intimate, understated relationship with one another. And my desire is to be part of it, to ask who they are, where they're going, but I know instinctively not to do so. And by chance at Cumberland, we get off at the same stop, and by chance follow them to to the same underground car parking spot, never quite close enough to hear what they say, and by now not wanting to invade this perfect space. Our cars are parked close to one another, and the girl finally sees both the camera and me. The silence is broken. That's a beautiful camera. And with that, we get into our cars, never to see the other again. What I'm showing you now, and my apologies because you probably can't read them, but they're a set of they ended up being called the additional material or the scrapbooks or the journal pages, and what they actually are many emails that I wrote, which are kind of my version of letters home, and they're also thoughts about what was happening both to my father and my family, but also of course what was happening in America. And we talked a lot about with the publisher whether to include this these notes, and in the end we decided not to. But I think they have value. I think they have value in a sort of educational context, in that they speak, I guess, about the kind of trials and tribulations of attempting to make a work, and so what we have ended up doing with them on a couple of occasions is I've sort of put them out in cases so people can read them, and I'll only read one or two of them, but I'll leave them out, so if people want to look at them, they can. And I really will only read one or two of them because they're quite sort of burdensome, perhaps. And we've lost our captain and are adrift at sea. Vanessa has an opportunity my father had relayed to my sister. The sound of his voice remains palpable, tinged with both sadness and hope. And each week on this journey, my brother has sent me an SMS. My father had related these modern-day SMS messages to Morse code. He tries to explain the most famous of all of these signals and communications. Tit, 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 da, 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 tit, 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 SOS. And then he laughs. The most useless thing I was ever taught in the army. Nevertheless, it has remained with him, and in a connecting way. More recently, he began to teach himself the foundations of Braille. And again, I make another association with blindness and seeing. And the image on the top middle right is actually the Humber Bridge, which is where I come from. This image was made when I returned home from the States. One of the things that as a photographer I'm slightly obsessed with doing is kind of making small pilgrimages to where other photographers have worked, to kind of stand in the ground where those people have made that work, and somehow it's a way and a means of informing me what they saw. So the image at the bottom, on the left-hand side, is where Robert Adams made his work on Rocky Flats. And the image the two images on the right-hand side, the two portraits, are some of the Occupy Wall Street protesters. And again, these are images that actually didn't make it into the work, but I wanted to include them. And I will read to you a small encounter. So, the image of the horse on the pedestal actually made it into the work, and this is what happened on the day that I was standing in that landscape. Walking down an empty street in Las Cruces, we meet a young couple. It's early morning and already felt like a Sunday. There was so little movement on the roads. I can't remember if we approached them or they us. They were carrying with them what seemed like all their worldly possessions and a large plastic bottle of water. Neither do I remember how the conversation started, but before long we knew something of their story. They'd spent the night sleeping behind a parked truck, and they could do with a shower. They'd been hitchhiking and train hopping for a while, and were trying to get to Panama. Quite an adventure. Yes, for sure, much better than here. They'd had several run-ins with the cops, and one final warning about train hopping. Next time they'd spend a few nights in a cell for their trouble. Now they were being more careful, relying on passing cars and the kindness of strangers. The man wore a tattoo on his forehead that read, "Stare." I couldn't quite bring myself to do as instructed, though I suppose I was already staring into his face as he spoke. And she was younger and had a face that was smooth and youthfully rounded. On either side of her mouth, 2 tattoos marked her face, each depicting downturned branches of barbed wire, like a sad-faced clown, never smiling. And as we continued to talk, I noticed movement on the inside of the man's jacket. Eventually he unzipped it to reveal a poppy, so tiny, sat in the palm of his hand, its back still warmed by the body of the man, and now by the early morning sun. Its fur was soft to touch as we each took our turn in stroking it, and for sure it was too long to have left its mother. But anyway, they were its parents now, this unlikely family. And this little piece of writing refers to the image on the bottom left-hand side. I finally begun to make some portraits, which has been a great relief. So many weeks of not really making that kind of contact was killing me. Today, from a distance, I spotted Paxton Simon. It's Philip and Patricia's place. A huge oak tree stood in front of 2 chicken perch school buses with 3 wooden houses behind them. Patricia makes soul food on a weekday, and Philip drives the school bus. Paxton Simon, the name of their little cafe, was named after their son who was killed. So poignant to be driving a bus full of kids when you've lost your own. Oak trees seem to be the thing here, and as with everything here, they're enormous. They really are truly beautiful. Their huge branches often stretching over protectively as they cover the land they cover, sometimes a house or a cemetery. And again today, I photograph swamp trees, and yes again, the birds, so many wonderful birds, pure white, like apparitions in the swamp, and another bright orange. And as we're talking about roads, one of the things that I noticed on the roads of America, you can actually sort of purchase or sponsor little stretches of road to sort of memorialise loved ones. And so I kind of collected some of them, some of the things they were, some of the people they were memorialising. So I called it Adopt a Highway. And it's really just a list of who has sponsored a little piece of road. Tom the volunteer, Alfred, Al Lamb, in loving memory, Black Dog Farm, in memory of our mum and dad, the villagers, Robert, Captain Lennox and family, Rosalie Posey Foster, Lions Club Florence, Marissa Ybarra, Veronica and Anthony Vargas, ACI Prison Arts and Trades Outlet, Roy and Helen Luck and Brenda Alston in loving memory, East Valley Astronomy Club, Arizona Renaissance Festival, Dons of Arizona, Gold Canyon Democrats, Gone But Never Forgotten, Family Campers. And then the next piece is a poem sent to by a very good friend of mine, on the Book of the Dead by Muriel Rukhauser. And on the right-hand side, I included a series of SMS messages that my brother sent to me during that time, and also the text that he continues to send to me, speaking about visiting my dad's spot and the birds that he has seen. The image on the top, in the middle, is one of the marches, or the march with Trayvon Martin's family in Miami, where he comes from. And again, it's an image I didn't include in the book, but the day of that march, we went to a park, and this is the encounter. This refers to the image of the two women. Ashley and her mother were at a picnic in a park in Miami There were two large groups of people, one mostly women and children, the other just men. Ashley was gliding along on a skateboard when I first saw her. I asked if I could make her portrait. The girl's mother spoke first. "You want to make a portrait of my daughter?" "Yes." "Of course. Where do you want to do it?" "I'll just set up my camera," I said. The men in the group notice what's going on, and they want to be part of it. Or rather, they want to know why they're not being asked. "Make a picture of us together. We're the real Miami people." "Okay, but I'd like to make Ashley's portrait on her own first." One of the men says he's her uncle. "So, you want to make a picture of the white girl? She's beautiful, isn't she?" I agree. And then they think I'm a fashion photographer. Well, no, I'm a portrait photographer. Ashley stands before my camera, and by now she's completely ignoring the men making a fuss around us. She's completely focused. Already the rest don't exist. I ask her if I can make another with her mother, and then another with Ashley's grandmother, all three women standing together. And finally I say, "Okay, let's make the group portrait." But several people think it's a stupid idea to let me make their picture, and the others decide they don't want to be in that picture if so-and-so is going to be in it. And so I try to negotiate the best compromise, struggling to please everyone, but never quite managing it. I fiddle with my camera, trying to get everyone in, all the time saying to everyone that they have to just be still, just for a while, just for a little while. I make one or two frames, certain I've not made a good picture. But the men are happy, laughing at one another's posing and the ridiculous nature of my picture making. And by now, I notice Ashley slipping away from the group. This chaos is not for her, especially having stood so perfectly calmly just moments before. And I won't read any more, but as I say, I'll leave them. Yes, thank you. So I'll put them out on the floor, and if people want to look at them, please do. That's it.